Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are focusing on what is really the true backbone of enterprise security, identity and access management, or IAM, as you'll hear it called. This is the mechanism that basically determines every single movement inside a network. It controls who you are, what you can see, and what you're allowed to change.
And this deep dive, it's less about abstract theory and much more about real-world strategy. We've synthesized a whole stack of sources on the most complex practical challenges an IAM professional faces. So our mission today is to unpack the specific architecture, the tactics required to go from, a theoretical concept to a truly resilient security posture.
And the sources we have here are comprehensive. It's really a blueprint derived from specialist interviews, and it covers the entire spectrum. We're talking everything from legacy applications to the hyper-modern world of multi-cloud and complex microservices. By the end of this conversation, you'll have a complete shortcut to understanding the strategic thinking that dictates how organizations protect their most valuable assets. Okay, let's unpack this. We should probably start with the most fundamental building block, the principle of least privilege. POLP, for short. Our sources are crystal clear on this. You can't implement it successfully until you've audited your current state. You have to find the gaps first.
That's the counterintuitive part. So many organizations, they just jump in trying to build roles. But you have to start by identifying what we call permission inflation. This is where Jane in marketing, who needed temporary access to a financial database 6 years ago, somehow still has full read-write access today. You audit to find that first, and then you revoke it.
Right, so once you have that clean slate, the solution pivots to defining roles using role-based access control, or RBAC. This means building a profile that's tied precisely to a job function. So an HR specialist, for instance, only accesses the personnel records they actively manage.
Correct. But POLP is more than just static roles. It really needs just-in-time access for any privileged accounts. So think of a system administrator. They need to patch a critical database. Instead of having these permanent, all-powerful admin rights, they have to request temporary elevation, usually through a PAM solution privileged access management.
And the system just grants it for a limited time.
Exactly. The system grants them access for, say, 2 hours, and then it's automatically revoked. It makes the entire event short-lived and, crucially, fully auditable.
That's a huge shift. You're moving from permanent keys to, temporary tickets? But Speaking of RBAC, designing those roles, it sounds incredibly complex. You can't just mirror the org chart drag.
Absolutely not. And that's where so many implementations fail. Effective RBAC, it demands extensive stakeholder interviews to really map out granular workflows. For instance, in a hospital, you have to understand the exact steps a clinical nurse takes versus what an administrative clerk needs. If you don't do that work up front, you end up with hundreds of confusing, overlapping roles. We call it role sprawl.
Okay, so how do you structure it to avoid that?
Yeah.
To avoid having, 1,000 different roles?
You build a logical hierarchy. You might have 3 basic layers, like viewer, analyst, manager, with increasing permissions. But then, to handle all the exceptions, you layer in something called attribute-based access control, or ABAC.
How does that work in practice?
Well, say you have a role like regional sales analyst. You don't create 12 different roles for 12 regions. You use ABAC to add an attribute like location equals Northeast, which dynamically restricts their access to only records tied to that specific region.
That's a much more elegant way to scale it. But who manages the disputes? When 2 departments are fighting over who gets access to some cross-functional tool.
Governance, that is key. Automation handles the easy stuff. So you integrate with your HR system like Workday to automate the initial role assignment. But for those really complex cross-organizational scenarios, you have to establish a formal governance committee that's security, compliance, and key business leaders, all in a room to enforce the design and resolve these exceptions without breaking that least privilege model.
So we've defined who you are with RBAC, but how do we prove it every time you're trying to access something? That brings us to multi-factor authentication, MFA, the real front line of defense. And the challenge here seems to be that balance between robust security and, user experience.
It is. And what's fascinating now is how organizations are using a risk-based approach to solve that exact dilemma. Look, if MFA is too clunky, if it's demanding 6 clicks every hour, your users will find insecure workarounds. They just will. So for standard users accessing low-sensitivity apps, a mobile authenticator app might be fine. It's convenient enough.
But I'm guessing the risk profile changes pretty dramatically for, say, a core infrastructure team.
Oh, dramatically. For privileged accounts or high-value accounts, you enforce hardware security keys, something like a YubiKey or a similar FIDO2 device. They are phishing-resistant and provide a much, much higher level of assurance. You match the authentication strength to the sensitivity of the data.
What about the practical logistics? I'm thinking of global companies. If you have people in remote areas with spotty cell signal, relying on SMS or push notifications just won't work.
That's a critical constraint our sources highlight. You have to implement specific offline authentication options for those environments. And you need rigorously secure recovery procedures. A lost hardware key is a huge risk factor, so that means secure, out-of-band recovery, a manager-assisted identity verification, maybe an in-person or a verified video call. You never, ever rely on the compromised account's email for recovery.
That attention to detail is critical. It moves us pretty smoothly into securing more advanced ecosystems, specifically managing privileged access in the cloud. Traditional on-prem PAM solutions. They don't really translate well to AWS, Azure, or GCP, do they?
They don't, no. Because the infrastructure is ephemeral, it's all managed via APIs. You need a comprehensive cloud PAM solution that integrates directly with those cloud platforms. The control is centered on a secure, isolated management network, a dedicated pathway just for administrators.
And we still need that tight just-in-time enforcement, even in the cloud.
Absolutely. Maybe even more so. The access windows are often strictly enforced. We're talking 2 to 4 hours for standard maintenance. Every action is logged and recorded. But the real game changer here is handling secrets.
And just to be clear, when we say secrets, we're not talking about user passwords. We're talking about credentials used by services and applications to talk to each other.
Exactly. API keys, database connection strings, service account credentials, these are pure gold for attackers. These secrets must have automated rotation, maybe every 30 to 60 days, and they have to be stored in a dedicated, secure vault. Something like HashiCorp Vault or Azure Key Vault. This completely eliminates the risk of a hard-coded key being compromised.
And this is where that DevOps mentality really blends with security. Treating privilege assignment as code. Why is using infrastructure as code for this so important?
It's vital. It eliminates human error and gives you an enforceable audit trail. When you manage privileges with IAC using tools like Terraform or CloudFormation, those assignments become version controlled. They get peer-reviewed before deployment, and they're deployed through a controlled CI/CD pipeline. So you have a documented, repeatable history of every privilege ever granted.
That emphasis on version control really stabilizes the security posture.
Okay, let's pivot to single sign-on, or SSO. For most big companies, the real challenge isn't adopting SSO for new services. It's integrating that sprawling inventory of legacy apps that just don't speak modern authentication protocols.
The architecture really has to be built around an identity provider, an IDP, that is protocol agnostic. So tools like Microsoft Entra ID or Okta are powerful because they support modern standards, SAML and OAuth. But for those legacy systems, maybe an old .NET app running on LDAP, you can't just throw them out. So you need a translator of some kind.
Precisely. You implement federation proxies, like using ADFS as an architectural bridge. These proxies, they intercept the authentication request, translate the legacy app's language into a modern token that the IDP understands, and then pass the verified identity back. It's about building bridges, not forcing a total replacement overnight.
And once that identity is established through SSO, how do you manage the session itself?
You have to establish consistent session management policies, but they need to vary based on the data's sensitivity. For a standard internal app, an 8-hour session might be okay. But if that user is accessing highly sensitive IP or financial data, you need to shorten that session length aggressively, maybe down to 2 hours, to reduce the window of exposure.
Okay, another huge area, securing APIs, especially now that microservices are the norm. If you have hundreds, maybe thousands of services all communicating, you can't manage access for each one individually. It would just go chaos.
Yeah. Chaos is exactly what we're trying to prevent by centralizing control. You implement a comprehensive API gateway, something like Kong or Apogee, as a single traffic cup. This gateway handles all the centralized authentication, authorization, and monitoring before any traffic even reaches the underlying service.
What are the technical standards you're using at that gateway level?
We're relying heavily on O2.0 with JWT tokens. A JWT token is like a highly secure, timestamped ticket. It provides authentication, it's designed to have a very short lifetime, and crucially, these tokens implement scoped access. So a token granted to one service might only allow read capabilities, ensuring it absolutely cannot execute a write or delete command.
And what about machine-to-machine traffic? That's service-to-service protection.
That requires mutual TLS or MTLS. It really is the gold standard. It's like a reciprocal ID check. Instead of just the client verifying the server, both parties present certificates to authenticate each other. It ensures that only trusted parts of your architecture can talk internally. And of course, we couple this with rate limiting and proper secrets management in the vaults we talked about.
That transitions us perfectly into detection and response, the active defenses. When it comes to preventing unauthorized access, static firewalls and segmentation are essential, but they can't catch a sophisticated insider threat.
Segmentation is the baseline, isolating financial systems on their own restricted VLANs. But to catch the subtle anomalies, you need behavioral analysis. You deploy something called User Entity Behavior Analytics, or UEBA. This tool establishes a normal baseline for every user. It learns what your developer normally does during business hours.
So what happens when it sees something abnormal?
It flags it. For example, if that same developer suddenly tries to access the HR database at 2 a.m., UEBA immediately flags that as high risk, even if the user technically has the permission to do it.
And what about specific defense tactics to confirm if an attacker's already inside?
We use layered defenses. So Network Access Control NAC solutions can quarantine non-compliant devices. If your laptop isn't patched, it gets segregated until it's fixed. For admins, you mandate privileged access workstations or pause-hardened clean machines used only for privileged tasks. And my favorite tactic is deploying honeypots.
The digital traps?
Exactly. You place these enticing but fake files or network shares, maybe a folder named executivesalaries.xlsx. It's completely useless, but if anyone ever accesses it, it triggers an immediate high-priority alert. It confirms you have an intruder who's breached the perimeter.
So if the worst happens and an employee's account is compromised, what is the immediate playbook? Time is critical.
The first non-negotiable step is immediate account disablement. Across all systems, you just lock it down. Simultaneously, you kick off the incident response plan, notify the security operations team, then it's forensics. You're reviewing logs with the SUM team to determine the blast radius. What did they access? Did the compromised sales manager view CRM data or just their email?
And the remediation for that account has to be bulletproof to prevent recompromise.
It has to be. Credentials must be reset via a secure out-of-band method, a verified phone call, an in-person verification. I cannot stress this enough. Never send the reset link via email. That's the channel that might be compromised. And then you implement temporary heightened authentication factors until you're certain the threat is neutralized.
Finally, let's look at identity lifecycle management, or ILM. This is a massive challenge for companies with high turnover.
Automation is the only way to manage that kind of volume efficiently. By integrating the ILM system directly with the HR system of record, you can reduce provisioning time from days to just minutes. It also virtually eliminates the risk of what we call orphaned accounts, those dormant accounts that just sit there collecting permissions.
So it's about automated onboarding and offboarding. What does a modern offboarding workflow really look like?
It's immediate and it's differentiated. For an involuntary termination, the HR record automatically triggers a hard lock on everything, instantly. For a standard departure, you might have a controlled workflow that allows a few days for knowledge transfer before the final lock. And you also apply time-bound access for all contractors, ensuring permissions expire exactly when the contract ends.
How do you manage external identities, the vendors or contractors who aren't in the main HR system?
You implement a sponsorship model. An internal employee has to sponsor every single external identity. They vouch for them, and they have to periodically review that access need, usually every 90 days. If the internal sponsor leaves, the contractor's access is automatically revoked until a new sponsor is designated.
We've covered an incredible amount of ground today. We've gone from the philosophical core of least privilege all the way through designing resilient RBAC and MFA, securing cloud and API environments, and enforcing rapid detection and life cycles.
Yeah.
It's so clear that effective IAM isn't a single tool. It's a meticulously integrated security architecture.
And it demands continuous learning. I mean, to stay current, you have to be active in professional communities like the Identity Management Institute or go to conferences like Identiverse. But most critically, you need hands-on practice. Testing new advanced controls like FIDO2 or new biometric standards in your own lab environments.
Because tomorrow's threats are already here.
Exactly. You have to keep pushing your knowledge forward.
That whole discussion about staying current, it raises a fundamental question for you to consider as we wrap up. Given the rise of decentralized identity and zero trust architecture, what specific access controls in your own organization Maybe ones that rely too heavily on the old perimeter defense model are already obsolete. And what new standard must you prioritize next to stay ahead of the curve?
A powerful point to reflect on. Until our next deep dive.
So I'll tell you next time.